Welcome to the 7th video in this tutorial series on building an e-commerce website using React Redux, GraphQL, and Firebase. Now in today's video, we're going to be looking at React hooks. Before we get started writing any code, I want to give you guys a rundown of some of the React hooks that we're going to be learning about and using in this tutorial. And the first one is the useState React hook. And what this allows us to do is access and use state within our functional components. And we're going to be using that throughout our auth flow, within our sign in, our sign up, and email password components, and generally throughout the application. It's one of the most commonly used React hooks because it's very, very useful. Another React hook that we're going to be looking at is the useEffect React hook. And this is a hook that is used in a similar way to component did mount or component will unmount lifecycle hooks that are used in classful components. And we're going to be using that to handle how we subscribe to our event listener, which again is how we determine and handle things like when the user's auth status changes, when they sign in or sign out of our application. And we're going to be using this hook within our app.js file. Another thing that I'm going to be doing in this tutorial is showing you how to write a custom React hook. And this is going to, again, change the way that we handle restricting access to certain pages within our application to only users only access. So basically only users that are currently logged into our application, they can access this page, access this route. And we're going to be writing a custom React hook combined with a higher order component to change the way that we currently handle restricting access to routes within our application. So it's going to be a lot of refactoring, a lot of cleaning up as well in this tutorial, but it's going to be really, really interesting. I know you guys are going to enjoy it. So let's go ahead and make a start. I will be posting a direct link in the description of this video to the official GitHub repository for this project. At the end of each of these tutorials, I'm creating PRs and I'm pushing the code I'm writing to this repository. I'm merging all of my PRs with master so that if at any point you want to compare the code that you're writing, or maybe you just want to come to this repository, you want to browse the project, look at the architecture, look at the files, look at the code, feel free to do that. Of course, I'd really appreciate if you'd star the project. If you want to fork it to your own GitHub repository, your own account, feel free to do that. Again, this is just a great way to work and to develop its complete versioning so that you can create your own branches and things like that. If you're familiar with Git, I really encourage you just head over to this link. It again will be in the description of the video. Check out the code I'm writing, and I think that will definitely help you. I also want to ask you guys to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Again, just this week we reached 20,000 subscribers. That's really a milestone for me, and I really hope to grow this channel more. Your support absolutely helps me, and again, your feedback, your comments, your likes, and things like that guides me in terms of the content that I'm looking to release in the future. So please head over to my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/simpletut. You can also find my GitHub page by visiting github.com/simpletut. But on my YouTube channel, I also have a playlist for this series. And again, I'll be posting a link in the description of this video. And all the videos I release in this series will be added to this playlist. And it's just a great resource for you if you're following this series video by video, being able to easily find the next video or go back to an earlier one in the series. If you want to pause, rewind, rewatch, all those things help a great deal as you're trying to follow and code along. Of course, I also encourage you guys to visit our official website. That's simpletut.com. So let's make a start. The first component that I want to convert is going to be our sign-in component. So let's quickly take a look at this component in the browser. So currently this is our login component. We have a fairly simple form with just an email and password. We also have this option to sign in with Google and to just a link here to the email password form. So the first thing that we're going to do is head back over to the code editor. Let's go into our sign in component. And the first thing I want to look at is state. So currently we are using, well, actually the first thing I want to do is convert this from a class to actually just being a functional component. So to do that, I'm just going to replace this class keyword with const because it's going to be defined as a const. Then of course, where we're saying extends component, we're just going to say it's going to equal a functional, well, equal a function. So it's going to take props and it's going to equal a function. Of course, here we have our render method. Well, we don't need, this isn't a class, so it's not going to have a render method. So we can just remove that and remove the closing bracket. And then we one by one have to go through and refactor the different parts of this component so that it will work as a functional component and work with hooks. Now this is not a class anymore, so we don't need a constructor. We can just delete that code entirely. And I can also tell you that we don't need this handle change method because we're going to use a React hook and we're also going to write it a little bit differently. Now the first thing that I want to do is I want to look at how we previously used state within this component. Now the way that we used it before was we destructured from state, we passed it as the value that gets displayed within our inputs, and we also had this separate handle change, which when the user typed, we actually fired a method that updated the state value. So as you type, you're just rendering out the value in the state rather than actually typing into a dumb input field. But we still need to use state within our component, but of course this is a functional component now, so we're not going to use this kind of state. So what we need to do is delete that line, and we're going to use our first React hook. So I'm going to delete this line where we imported component and destructured that from React, and instead we're going to destructure the use state hook. And this hook actually allows us to use and access state within our functional component. And the way we can use that is we just declare it as a const, and we're going to use this use state hook. And the first thing that we need to do is declare the piece of state, right? So we need one for email and we need one for password. These are the two fields we have within this component. So let's do email first. So I'm going to declare the state as email, and then we need a function that we can use and we can call to update this state. And the way we do that is we use the set keyword, we prefix it with set, and we say set the name of the piece of state. So in this case, it will be set email. And we use camel casing. Now we can pass a default value in the use state hook. And in this case, we're going to set the default value to be an empty string. And that's all you need to do. You can then use and access the state via email, and you can use the set email function to update the state. So let's do the same thing for email, and I'll type that out a lot quicker. So it's just going to be use state. The default value will be an empty string, and then of course we'll declare the state as password, and we'll say set password, which will be the function we use to update the state. That looks great. Now, if we scroll down the page, you're going to see that previously we were using this handle change prop to parse this method where we actually handled updating the state as the user types in our form field. The way that this is now going to work is we're going to use this set email and set password functions to update the state manually. So to do that, we'll just take the event, and then we're going to use this set email function, and it's going to take the event.target.value, and that will actually update the state as the user types in the field, which eventually will then render out within the form field because we're passing the state to the input field. Let's do the same for our password field. So again, we'll take the event, we'll call set password, which will accept the E, which is event.target.value. And we'll save that. That looks great. Now, the next thing that I want to do here is look at our handle submit method that is used when the user actually clicks login and they try to log in. So what we want to do here is I want to convert this to a const. This is just going to be a function now. And there's not a huge amount here we need to change. I can say that we don't need this line at all because we already have access to the email and password. It's within the scope of our functional component. So this is already declared. That's fine. But here we're resetting the form, right? So we're resetting the form fields. We're if they're logging in successfully before they're redirected, we're actually we're emptying the fields. So instead of doing this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call set email, and I'm going to pass it an empty string. And I'm going to also call set password, and I'm going to pass that also an empty string. But I think it would be better if this was actually a function in itself. So up here, I'm going to say reset form, and this is going to again equal a functional component, and I'm just going to pass these two calls here into this function so that here all I'll have to do is call reset form, and that will work the same way. I can also completely remove this initial state object because we don't need that anymore. Now finally, if we actually look at our form and the onSubmit method that we're currently using, as you can see, we're using the this keyword, which we don't need anymore. So all we need to do is just remove that this keyword. We can save it, and that's all the work involved in converting this classful component to a functional component that uses React hooks. So let's head over to the browser and let's test the form, make sure it's not broken. So let's go to login, and I'm just going to use this. So of course here I'm going to type in the email, and as you can see, I'm still able to type in the field, which means that the use state hook is working. Let's also enter the password. That works just as well. Let's click on login, and as you can see, it works just fine. So that means that we've successfully implemented React hooks. It's not affected our site or our application at all, and that's been successful. So the next component that we want to refactor is our registration component, and these are very similar components, so there's not going to be much difference in how we approach it or how we write the code. So I can probably write this a little bit quicker now that you guys have already I've already kind of explained it once to you already, but let's go through this process again. So the first thing that we need to do is convert this from a class to a functional component. So instead of this being class, it's const. We don't need extends component. We need this to equal a function which accepts props. We can also remove our constructor. We know how we want to handle the onChange event. So we'll get rid of this handle change method completely. Let's just scroll down and we'll remove this render method here because we don't need that anymore. Awesome. Let's scroll up here. And again, we don't want to use or destructure from state at all. So I'm going to remove this line here. Let's come back to the top. And where we destructure component, we're going to remove component. We're going to import use state. And again, we then need to declare that within our component. So the first one is going to be our display name. Oops. So the way it works is like this. So we'll say use state. The default value will be an empty string. The first piece of state is going to be display name. Then we'll say set display name. Then we want to do the same for email. So we'll declare the state as email and set email. Again, use state, pass it an initial string. We want to do the same for our password state. So password and set password equals use state, and we're going to pass it an initial empty string. We need our confirm password, and we're going to pass it the set confirm password function. Use state, initialize with an empty string, and finally we're going to have errors and set errors equals use state, and we're going to pass it an empty array. And we can delete this initial state object that we previously had here. Okay, cool. Now let's just collapse this handle form submit because we're going to come back to this. So let's scroll down the page and let's look at our return. So in here we have our form inputs. Now on these components I was directly passing the onChange event. Within my form input here, you'll see that I have a handle change event, a prop that I can pass to my form component where I actually call on the onChange event. So like I was doing here in my sign-in component, I passed handle change. Well, I want to do that within my sign up. So what I'm actually going to do is for these components, I'm going to refactor it a little bit. So I'm going to remove this line with the onChange event, and I'm going to pass it the custom handle change prop. And I'm going to take the event, and then I'm going to pass it to set display name with the event.target.value. And we can do that for each one of these form input components. So I'm going to just take the event and pass it to the equivalent update function. So this will be set email. We're going to pass it the event.target.value. Now the only reason I'm converting this from handle change from onChange is because on my form input component, I declared this custom prop where I actually call this event on the onChange, where I actually call this handle change method on the onChange event. So in actuality, this is actually completely the same as this. It's just that I built this form component where I have a custom prop that will handle this for me. The reason that this was working before is because I actually allow myself to pass custom props to this input field anyway, which actually does the same thing, but I just have this custom prop within my form input component I wrote in an earlier video in this series, and I want to use this in my component here for consistency. So hopefully that makes sense, but if not, then hopefully you can just follow what I'm doing, and it will make sense to you as we go. So again, we have this event, so we'll take the event, we'll call the set password function, and we'll pass it e.target.value. And finally, we have confirm password handle change. It's going to take the event, and it's going to be set confirm password. We're going to pass it the event.target.value. Cool. Now, again, let's scroll up to the top here, and you're going to see that we need to look at this handle change method that we previously used. We can remove the this keyword because it's just going to be a function now, and we need to convert this method to a function, so we'll just declare this as a const. Again, we don't need to destructure these values from any kind of state here, and again, because we're inside the scope of our component of our function, we already have access to these values, so we don't need to worry about that. What we do here is we have this set state for our errors array. Well, we don't need to do that either. Well, in the same way, the way this will work is we'll have set errors. We'll call that function, and we'll pass it our errors array. Now, we also have this again, the line where we reset our form. So what I'm going to do, again, I'm going to have this custom reset function. We're going to call this reset. And we're just going to call each one of these functions here and pass it an empty string. So we have set display name, we have set email, we have set password, and we have confirm password, and we have our errors array, which is going to default to an empty array. So we can now call this reset function in replace of our set state, and that will do the same thing. And then let's just scroll down and take a really quick look and make sure we've not missed anything. It looks good. And all I'm going to do now is I'm going to save the file and come back over to my browser. Let's reload the page. I'm not seeing any errors. Cool. I'm not seeing any errors. So let's try and sign up. So the full name will be Joe Blogs. We'll say joe@email.com. Password will be 123456 1@123456 and let's try and register. And there you go. We're not only signed up, but we're also logged into the application. That's great. So let's now log out, and there you go. So let's go ahead and refactor this component. And again, this is a little bit simpler, but the first thing we want to do is replace class as a const. This is going to be a functional component. Remove extends component. It's going to equal a function, so it's going to accept props. We can delete our constructor. We can delete this handle change method. Let's scroll down. We don't need a return a render method, so we're going to delete that line and also the closing curly bracket. And of course, if we scroll up here, you're going to also see that we have we're destructuring email and errors from state. Let's delete that entirely. We need to destructure from React the use state hook, and we're going to use that to access state within our functional component. The two pieces of state that we need are going to be, so again, use state. The first one is going to be email, and we're going to use the set email function to actually update this email state, but the default value will be an empty string. And then finally we need an errors piece of state, an errors array. We're going to have set errors as our update function, and we're going to use state to initialize that with an empty array. Cool. Let's come down, let's scroll down here, and you're going to see that we have our form input here. And again, as I previously explained, we're going to use our custom handle change event here, and we're going to call the event as a function, and we're going to use the set email function here and posit the event.target.value. Now on our form, when the user clicks the submit button, what we want to do is call this as a function. So we'll need to convert our handle submit to be a function from a method. And what we want to do here is, again, we don't need to destructure email from state because, again, it's inside the scope. We already have access to the user's email. And what we can do, if we just come down here, again, this is a functional component, so there's no this keyword. We have access to props because we're passing it in here. That works the same way. And again, here we're setting the errors. So rather than calling this.setState, we'll just say set errors, and we'll posit our error array. And now we can just scroll up. Let's delete this initial state object that we had before, and we can save the file, and we're ready to test this in our web browser. So let's come back over. Let's go to the web browser, and let's go to our reset page. This is our email reset email form. Let's enter an email of an account we have registered. Click on the email password button. Okay, redirects us to login. And as you can see here, I'm receiving my reset email form, and everything is still working as expected. Okay, so at this point, we have successfully converted over the main classful components that we have in our application so far. That's to do with our auth flow. It's our sign in, sign up, and email password components. We've converted them over to be functional components, and we've utilized React hooks. So far, we've only looked at the use state React hook. I would argue it's probably the most useful React hook that there is. So it's great that we're familiar with that already, but it's time for us to look at a different component that will need to use a different React hook in, and that is going to be our app.js file. Now, this is the last, or one of the last classful components we have in our application right now. And all our app.js file does is it actually is where we define our routes, and we're not actually using state within this class at all. In actual fact, we're not going to use state at all in this component. But what we are doing is we have utilized some lifecycle hooks within our class. And those are obviously component did mount and component will unmount. And we're using those lifecycle hooks currently to subscribe to an event from Firebase that with an event listener that tells us to update the application when the user logs in or they sign out of our application. And we're dispatching an action to our Redux store to actually update our store with the user's information when they are logged in or not. And that information, again, is coming from Firebase. And we're doing that in our component did mount. And then, of course, when we unmount from this component, we're unsubscribing to ensure that we don't have any memory leaks in our application. And we're not using state. We're connected to the Redux store, so we're actually getting this current user object from props, which means, again, we don't need state in this component. It's coming through from our Redux store. But after I've refactored this component, I then want to show you, just to let you know, that we're also going to refactor and I would say also clean up how we're currently handling restricting access to pages. And we're going to look at writing a custom React hook, which is another really useful topic for us to cover in this tutorial, so that we can actually rewrite this with a custom React hook and a higher order component. Okay, so I think we're ready to start the refactor of our app.js file. And the first thing that we need to do is just convert this over from being a class to being a functional component. So instead of class, we're going to declare it as a const, and we're going to pass it a function that's going to take props. And of course, that means we don't need this render method, so I'm going to remove this line here. And I'm going to remove the closing bracket as well. Now I can scroll up, and the first thing that I want to look at is these lifecycle hooks we're currently using. And that would be, of course, the component did mount and component will unmount. Now we're using these methods effectively to subscribe using an event listener to an event that takes place from Firebase, where the user's auth status changes within our application. So when the user signs in or signs out, we get the user's data back from Firebase, and we dispatch an action to our Redux store to update the user's information and store their data, so that we know that they're signed in or that they're logged out, right? That's how this works. And then when this component unmounts, we use the component will unmount lifecycle hook to unsubscribe from this event, and that ensures that we don't have any memory leaks in our application. So of course we still need the same functionality, but we don't want to use these lifecycle hooks because it's not a class anymore. We don't have access to these lifecycle hooks. So how are we going to do that? Well, we have another React hook that I'm going to import in place of component. We're going to destructure from React. And this is called the useEffect hook. And this works in a very similar way to how our component did mount works. And the way it works is that it's a function we can call. We can pass it a function here, and we can pass a second array, which what this will do is basically accept any dependencies. So for example, if I had a const here of, let's say, a count value, which was equal to 0, whenever this count changed, if I pass this here, I could have some code here, and whenever this value here of count changed, so this changed to 1, it would rerun this code. And that's effectively how useEffect works. It also allows us to return something, and this effectively will take care of the component will unmount lifecycle hook. So whenever this component unmounts, it will allow us to run the code within this return function. And that's basically the structure of our useEffect React hook, right? That's basically how it works. So what I want to do, first of all, is I want to take the code that we currently have within component did mount, and I want to move it from that lifecycle hook inside of my use effect React hook. And then I'm going to show you how we can refactor it. I'm also going to move my code inside of the component will unmount. And I want to move that inside of, as I explained, this return function. And then I'm going to show you slowly how to refactor this logic. Now, currently, we have this auth listener here, which is where we basically handle our event listener. I'm going to remove this entirely. We don't need this line anymore because we're going to be able to declare this as a constant. It's not a class. We don't need the this keyword. We're just going to declare this as auth listener. And that also means that in our return, we can remove again the this keyword and just call this as a function. And the reason that this is a function is because the onAuth state changed from Firebase returns a function that you can call to unsubscribe from this event listener. So that's just fine. And in fact, that's really all we need to do in order to refactor this code. But I will say that we're currently destructuring this from props within our useEffect hook. I don't think we need to do that. I think we can do it outside of our hook. So I'm going to move that outside. And of course, also, we don't need the this keyword. We're passing in props here. So I'll remove that and we can continue to destructure the set current user action that gets dispatched. Now, if I scroll down, you're also going to see that we're destructuring the current user object right here from props. I'm going to take that line away, and I'm just going to use the comma to destructure that from props up here. Now, this current user object is actually, again, coming from the Redux store. It's getting this information here. But what we're doing is we're using that currently to conditionally manage restricting access to our pages, right? Currently, that's how it's working in our application. And that's fine, but I am going to refactor that in just a moment. But before we do, let's come back over to the browser and let's just reload this page and just check that what we've refactored so far is still working and it hasn't broken anything in our application. We can test that out by going to our login page and just signing in. So I'm going to do that and I'll enter my password, click on login. And as you can see, I'm logged into the application. My header's updated. I can click on logout now and I can log out. Okay, so at this point, we've managed to refactor our app.js file and it is working. But what I want to do now is I want to look at how we're handling restricting access to pages within our application. Currently, we are destructuring the current user from our props within the app.js file itself, and we're using that to conditionally render a component within the render prop of our routes. But I actually want to refactor this, and I want to use a custom React hook that will actually handle getting the value of the current user object from the Redux store. And I want to use a higher order component to actually handle restricting access to our actual routes. And I'll explain that a little bit more as I write the code. But the first thing that I want to do is I want to create my higher order component that I can then wrap and use within my routes. So to do that, within my source folder, I'm going to create a new folder and I'm just going to call it HOC, which stands for higher order component. And I want to call this with auth.js. And effectively all this is going to be is basically a const, which is going to be called, as I said, with auth. We can actually give it a capital W. So we're going to call it with auth. And all it's going to do, it's going to equal props. And we're then going to call a custom React hook that is going to eventually go and effectively return the current user object from the Redux store. And then we're going to basically call props.children to, if the user is successfully signed in and they're a valid user, then we want to return the page that otherwise would be restricted. So we need to go ahead and create our custom React hook, right? So to do that, I'm going to have another new folder within my source directory called custom hooks. And I want to have a single file that I can import my custom hooks from. So I'm going to create an index file that I'm not going to write my custom hooks in, but I want to export them from. So actually for this custom hook, I'm going to have a separate file, and I'm going to call this useAuth.js. Now, use is a very important keyword here because all custom hooks should be prefixed with use. So in this case, I'm calling the file the name of the hook, but the hook is going to be called useAuth. So that's a very important thing for you to be aware of. The first thing that we need to do is import something from React Redux. And we want to import the useSelector function. That's going to allow us to map state from our Redux store. So to do that, we need to write a function that's similar to the one we write when we write map state to props, but it's just going to be called map state. And we want to destructure from the state the user state. But once we get that, we're going to call it the function. We're just going to get the current user from the user.currentUser. And then what we can do is write our custom hook. So we're going to call this again, we're going to call it useAuth. And it's just going to take props, will be a function, and we're going to get that value. And all we do is we say const, we use that useSelector function, we pass it map state, and that will give us the current user, which we can then return the current user. And that will mean that I can access that within my withAuth higher order component. So I already mentioned I don't want to import that directly from this file. So I'm going to export default useAuth here, but within the index file here, I'm going to import that. So it's going to be useAuth from useAuth, and then I'm just going to export an object here, and I'm going to export useAuth. And the reason I've structured this in this way is that I want a single file that I can import these custom hooks from, but I want to write the actual hooks separately. So within my higher order component, I'm going to be able to import that. So we're going to import that from, again, the single file, which is our custom hooks. And we want to import useAuth. And we can actually call this here. We can call useAuth. And we're going to pass it our props. Now we do need to export default here with auth like that. But this is where we need to come back over and just figure out what we want to do here. So we want to use a custom, we want to use the useEffect React hook. And if the current user is null, is not defined, it means that the user is not logged in. So if they're trying to access this page, they need to be redirected in some way to log in. So first of all, let's just go ahead and import that. So we need to import from React. We need to import useEffect. And I think I'm going to import this first because it's React, right? And that means we'll just use that here. So we're going to use that within our hook. We'll say useEffect here. So that takes a function. And the second argument is the dependencies. And in this case, the dependency is current user. So whenever current user changes, we want to rerun this code. But what is the code that we want to run? Well, it's a check. So we're going to have an if here, which conditionally checks if the current user object is null. And if it is null, we want to handle that. We want to run some action. We want to do something. And I want a way of redirecting the user to the login page. To do that, I need to come back over to my higher order component, and I need to import something from React Router. So we want to import from, we'll destructure from React Router DOM, and we want to import with router. And when we export our higher order component, we need to wrap with auth with router. So now that I've done that, I'm going to have access to the history of within React Router. And remember, we're passing props to our custom hook, our user auth. And in user auth, we have access to props. So what I'll do is, if the current user is null, then we're going to access props dot history dot push, and we'll redirect the user to the login route. And again, I have access to history because of with router, and we're passing the props to the custom hook. And that's all we need to do. So I can now come back over to app.js, and on routes where I'm currently restricting access to. And in fact, we don't actually have that. We don't have a route that we're restricting access to, because in this case, we're doing the reverse. If the user is logged in, right, then we're redirecting them to the home page, because we don't think that the user who's already got an account and are logged in needs to access registration, because they've already signed up. They don't need to sign up again. But what our with auth is doing is the reverse. If the user is not logged in, then we want them to be logged in to access this page. So we need a new page to restrict access to. So I'm going to create a new page. So I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call this the dashboard. And it's going to be very, very simple for now. It's just going to have an index.js file. Okay, we'll create styles, so styles.scss. In here, it's just going to import React from React. And we want to create a functional component, so const dashboard from, oops, not from, what am I doing? It's a functional component, so props like that. We'll just return something. For now, we'll just return a h1 that says you're logged in. And we'll export that, so export default dashboard, and we'll import that style sheet, even though we're not going to write anything just yet. And that's pretty much it. It's pretty simple. Simple page component. So within my routes, so in app.js here, we can import that new page. So we'll import dashboard from the page component we just created, so pages./dashboard, and then we can create a new route here. So we'll have that route set up here. We'll just, for now, let's copy our recovery route. Let's rename the path to dashboard, and we'll conditionally render that, not conditionally, sorry, we'll render the dashboard component here within our main layout. So we have our we have our dashboard component, and that's fine. So let's try and access this page now, and we should see the page because, as you can see, we've not restricted any access to the page. But I'm going to actually add a link in the header over here too. So let's come back over to our header component so we can actually link to this page. Let's come over here, and in our header component we have a list for when the user is logged in and they're logged out. So I'm going to copy a link here. There we go, link, register. We'll just call this our dashboard, and we'll link to that as well. Here we'll create the link, and let's actually just add this link up here too. Let's add it in both scenarios, right? So let's come over to the browser again. You'll see that we have the link in our header, so we can access this page now quite easily. We're not restricting access to it, right? But it shouldn't be right now because we've not coded it to. So let's come back over to the code and restrict access to this page, and I'll show you how that works. So within app.js, what we're going to do is we're going to import, first of all, our higher order component. So we're going to import our higher order component. We'll import that up here at the top. We'll say we want to import with auth from our higher order component with auth. So cool, let's go ahead and do that. We have with auth, and we want to wrap our entire component here. So just like that, we're going to wrap with auth. We can save it, and let's come back over to the browser, and as you can see, we have an error, and it is due to a spelling error. So let's come back over to the code and head over to my custom hook. So we have that here in the use auth, and I spelled history wrong. So I got the R and the O the wrong way around. So let's save that again. Let's come to the browser, and as you can see, it is working. So I can actually come to and from the page, and I'm being redirected to log in. I can't access the page. So now let me log in and demonstrate that it actually does work. So I'm going to log in, and I'm redirected. So let's go to dashboard, and as you can see, I am now logged in. I can access the page because I'm logged in. And again, let's log out. So I'm on the page and I log out. I'm redirected now to log in. So you can see that using a custom React hook and using this higher order component, I've refactored how I'm handling those pages. But I want to show you something else. So currently, if I log in again, so I'm going to log in and enter my password and log in. If I come back, I cannot access the login route. This is to do with, again, if I come back over to the routes, the app.js file, we're doing this, right? We're preventing the user from visiting the registration page when they are logged in, because they don't need to log in again. They don't need to register again. But I want to do this in a different way. So I'm going to remove this current user, this conditional here, and I'm just going to render my layout. So I'm just going to render registration, and I'm just going to render the login route. Come over to the sign up component, and I want to import something from React Router DOM, which is going to be with router, and we'll need to wrap where we export our component. So where we export sign up, we'll need to wrap with router. That will give us access to the history, and we can use that. So we can say props dot history dot push, call that function, and we're going to push them to the home page. And we want to do the same thing on our sign-in component. So where we actually are already importing link, I'm going to additionally import with router. Let's scroll down, and again we're going to wrap this with router, and again that gives us access to the history prop. So will we reset the form here within handle submit, we're going to call props.history.push and push the user again to the home page. Let's come back over to our header component, because I really added the extra list item just to demonstrate the code. So actually when the users, before they've logged in, I'm going to remove that link to the dashboard, and when they are logged in as well as log out, we have the dashboard link, which is fine, but I want to rename this to my account. So I'm going to save that. That's amazing. So all we need to do is test this out in the browser. So let's come to the home page and let's log in, or let's actually sign up. So let's just enter here Joe Blogs. We'll say Joe Blogs at outlook.com, and the password, and confirm password, and register the user. And you'll see they're redirected to the home page. We now have this link for my account in the header. They can click that, they can access the page. Let's log out. We're redirected to log in. Let's log in with that same user. So let's go to Joe Blogs. I believe it was Outlook. That was the email I used. Let's enter the same password. Let's log in, and we're again redirected to the home page with a link to my account in the header. I can move around the site, I can access that page, but if I come to log in, I can't. Let's also try and access that just entering it in the browser. So let's go to dashboard, right? Let's enter that. You can see I'm immediately sent to log in. I cannot access that page. Okay, that brings us to the end of this video tutorial. But before we check in the code, let's just run our commit. So git commit. I'm going to call this commit React hooks refactor. Check in, and let's push that up. And as always, once I complete this tutorial, I'm going to merge with master. So again, you can find all of this code on the official repository for this project. There'll be a direct link in the description of this video. In the next video tutorial, we're going to be looking at user levels. We're going to be looking at creating an admin area. So obviously we'll need admin rights access, but of course that we're also going to create an admins area where we can create new products that we can eventually use on the front end of our application. As always, please like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe. Have a great day.